Welcome to another episode of Living with FASD. And today we're going to continue with our series of candid conversations with people who have been living with FASD for a very long time. Today's special guest is Neil Turley, who, like me, discovered fairly late in life that he had FASD. And he is just a gem in our community, is very active on the Flying with Broken Wings page. If you have not discovered that site on Facebook, it is a wonderful place. So good morning, Neil, and thank you so much for joining us today on Living with FASD.
Yeah, thanks. It's good to be here. I mean, this is where I get so much fulfilled is online in my FASD,
Yeah.
It's the only place where I get the recognition of it. In fact, even my family's not willing to recognize it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how many family, I know, because you're a little bit older than me, I believe. So how many of your family do you have left? I know, like, for instance, my husband, he's 62, but he's the baby. So half of his siblings are gone already. So what about your family?
I got three siblings. Myself, I'm the middle child.
Okay.
Everyone's still alive. My father died 7 years ago. And my mother, my biological mother, is still alive
Okay.
at 98 years old.
Wow.
And
Okay.
she still drinks.
Oh my. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
But
mine is almost, go ahead.
I was going to say she still drinks,
Yeah.
but they de-alkalized her wine.
I
So
was
she
going to,
doesn't
yeah.
she doesn't know.
Yeah, mine is the same way. She'll be 92 the end of July, and she's been sober for 3 years and has no idea because I buy dealkalized wine by the case, and I keep refilling those 4 ounce or 6 ounce bottles that you can get at the grocery store that, we use them to pour into the pot roast, right? But she would drink them. So I just keep refilling them, and she's got no clue.
Well, that's quite
So,
remarkable, isn't it? That says something. But
yeah.
it probably goes beyond that. And looking into family systems theory and knowing my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, she was a considerable drinker.
Mm.
She was a flapper from the 1920s, from the roaring 20s. Her mother, my mother's mother, would have been a suffragette. Very
Oh my
independent
goodness.
women.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
As
know
she, Go ahead.
I was going to say in those early years of, the women's movement, there was a fierce determination to do all things that men could do, including hang out at bars.
Yeah, because, originally off sales from a bar out the back was invented for the women who weren't allowed to drink in bars. They could come to the back door, get a brown bag for their bottle, and they were supposed to take it home and drink. My grandmother, nuh-uh, she would strut down St. Catherine Street in Montreal with her sister, tall woman wearing her fur mink stole, going into clubs and bars and having drinks. And she actually got kicked out of the Waldorf Astoria in New York for smoking a cigar in the lobby of the Waldorf Astoria. A real character.
Trailblazer.
During Prohibition, my grandmother got busted crossing the border into New York from Quebec because she'd sewed pockets into her garments to put Mickeys in. And she's traveling with her two children, my uncle and my aunt, and she hid bottles underneath their pillows. She got busted at the New York border, and they put her in Ellis Island.
Oh my goodness.
So my grandfather in Montreal had to send down his driver to pick her up and get her released. Any event, all I'm pointing out is that alcohol was so prominent,
Yeah.
and the likelihood that I'm actually second generation
Yeah.
FASD. And I
Okay.
wish there was a way to check that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I knew my grandmother. I realized that half of her medications were alcohol based, and she was always complaining and always had issues. And so, my uncle was notoriously alcoholic, and my aunt, she drank too. So I'm thinking I'm second generation FASD, and I wish there's
Yeah.
more research on this
Yeah.
because I don't have I don't believe I have the same FASD as a first generation person. My
That's
me
an
and
interesting idea.
my siblings and I, we don't have the same substance abuse attraction
Hmm.
to substances or abuse them like that.
Yeah.
We have other issues,
Yeah.
but
So that is actually an idea that maybe we could float toward the ALC to see if they can shop that research idea out somewhere, because that's actually a really, really interesting idea. It's, excuse me, I don't know if the hiccups or burps or I don't know. Um, anyway, that is a really interesting hypothesis, and I would love to see that chased down. I'm kind of in your boat, Neil, because um, caring for my mom with her dementia, with her living with me the past 4 years, I've heard a lot of stories that I had never heard before we lived together, and I'm sure my brothers never heard either. Things about her early childhood. For instance, she hadn't identified her age, and I missed the opportunity to ask. But she talked about being very young. So when she told the story, I imagined somewhere between 3 and 6, um, going through the living room and dining areas, the public rooms of her childhood home, and downing what was left in the glasses from her parents' party the night before. So it's not much of a stretch to imagine that these parties were going on when she was in the womb, when her big brother were in the womb. Um, and one of the bugaboos about FASD is the effects on the jaw and teeth. You can have too many teeth or too few teeth, fused teeth, lack of enamel, all that stuff. Well, she definitely has an enamel issue. And we discovered when I took her up to get a tooth pulled like 2 years ago, one of her molars was actually implanted 90 degrees from what it had been. It was, put down sideways into her jaw. Um, and my uncle had 4 teeth too many, and I was missing 4. The family joke, of course, was he had my teeth, but it really makes putting all these pieces together. It kind of makes me wonder: am I also second generation FASD? And how do we find out? Right, my mom is the only one left. She's not almost 92. There's no one to
well,
ask.
in my circumstance, this would never ever have come to light. FASD would never have come on the radar simply because my mother came straight out and admitted that I drank through all of my pregnancies,
Mm-hmm.
and you kids are fine. The notion back then was 10 toes, 10 fingers. You're good.
Good enough.
You're good to
Yeah.
go. Good to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it seems like that baby boom generation of parents drank quite a bit. I mean, Barbara Bush came out and acknowledged, that her son George Bush, president of the United States, was the way he was because she drank and smoked throughout pregnancy. So there was
Well,
a
I have to
predominant.
put Neil, I have to put you on pause for 1 minute and check on my
Okay,
mom.
okay, go ahead. I'll ask another question. Yeah.
Sorry about the interruption, folks. So life with dementia means that any minute you can get pulled away for something. So, Neil, my apologies. I think we had
I have
been
my fidget toy. It's okay as long as I have my fidget toy.
Right on. So we had been talking about intergenerational FASD and how your mother came right out and admitted that she drank all the way through the pregnancies. So I don't know if you can pick that thread up or
Yeah.
if we just
So,
want to start somewhere else.
you know, alcohol back then, she would wait till 5 o'clock to have a drink. And that would kind of bolster her, I guess. She'd finish preparing dinner, and then at dinner time, no liquor, no alcohol. My father would come home. He wouldn't drink either. This is the thing about them. They kind of they kind of hid their alcoholism. My father was a work hard, play hard, wild alcoholic. Very attracted to the change it brought about in him. And of course, he never drank at home. So we never saw him drunk. The family, we got the hangover. And fortunately, he never had that bad a hangover. Well, debatable. But it wasn't until I was about 25 years old when I met him and he was half drunk. And he's just the nicest man I've ever met. A buddy, palling around, yeah, and everything like that. He was just a completely changed person. I thought, I want this person for my father.
Yeah.
But my sober father was a rageaholic. Um, I would say now that probably had Asperger's. He had savant intelligence in some areas, but just couldn't tolerate people not on his wavelength. And
Yeah.
he'd get in your face and just make you feel terrible. And then surprisingly to see him when he was drunk and say, wow, and I wish I had this
Yeah.
person around more often. So
Yeah.
he had real difficulty with and in trying to quit. He'd take on big projects to try and quit. And then finally in his 60s, he got diabetes. And to his credit, he stopped drinking.
Good for him.
He wanted to be a healthy alcoholic. He was a jogger. He jogged and exercised every day so that he could be healthy enough to drink Thursday, Friday, and Saturday
Yeah.
with his buddies.
Yeah.
Always drinking with his buddies. They
Yeah.
were the part of his life that he just never shared with his family, unfortunately. And of course, that scared my mother. That when we were a young family, he wouldn't come home at night or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's afraid he's in the ditch, and before cell phones or stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, any event,
Yeah. Here I'm relating. Go ahead.
my mother drank to cope with my father's drinking, if that makes any sense at all.
Oh, total sense. Yeah. Yeah. So
So,
many people use alcohol as a coping mechanism for whatever the uncomfortable feeling is underlying it, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, whether it's the stress of a bad marriage or a bad job. Alcohol is oftentimes our go-to coping mechanism. Unfortunately, it left you guys all with the hangover dad. And hangover dads are grumpy and rageful. I was really relating in some ways to your description of your father, because in many aspects it described my father. Um, in their early years of marriage, there was always a keg in the basement. And both my parents drank a lot. And I do believe my oldest brother was affected much more severely than I was.
boys
Uh,
boys are boys are always affected more severely.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Um, but my father, even though he was a high school dropout, he dropped out so that he could go to airplane mechanic school and get the job of his choice when he went into World War II. And of course, they put him on bomb disposal. It's a good thing he was good at his job. But, education aside, he was brilliant and had several patents to his credit, was a renowned engineer internationally, sought after, but he also was very frustrated because so many of his ideas were decades ahead of their time. And so I think in part, some of that drinking was to numb that frustration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's interesting because, my father was an accountant, and he became a senior partner in a large international accounting firm, Price Waterhouse, and he innovated auditing. He innovated the accounting process.
Mm-hmm.
The method by which they do audits was established by him, and it became de rigueur for North American accounting. He was the first forensic accountant,
Oh, wow.
the first accountant to investigate bank failures.
Yeah.
He investigated 2 bank failures in Canada and 1 in the Bahamas for the British government.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this was all just matter of fact. He didn't have an ego about it. He didn't particularly like the job. Looking forward to retiring. He was a creative man. He helped. He renovated the homes we lived in. Did it as well as any carpenter. It's like, his only other great passion was sailing. He sailed, and drinking and sailing go together quite well. So they would take
Not
their
much else
Caribbean.
to do on the boat, huh?
Well, they'd take their Caribbean vacations every year, and that would be his opportunity to just go all the way into his Ernest Hemingway life.
Instead of being the weekend warrior. Yeah.
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 And so
So tell me about your journey in discovering FASD as a thing. I mean, obviously, you've always known you were an adult child of alcoholics, and
yeah,
I need to point out for the audience that you do not have to have alcohol dependent parents in order to have FASD. Um, as a previous guest, Dr. Susan Rich stated, if you can have one Long Island iced tea, which is 6 shots, one time, if it's just the right timing in your pregnancy, you can get the full kit caboodle effect of fetal alcohol syndrome.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
So,
you're looking at it analytically, and that's correct. It's like we're 4 siblings. 2 were planned, and 2 were not planned. The 2 unplanned kids are less symptomatic of FASD. The 2 unplanned kids, me and my older sister, have several symptoms of FASD. Plus, me and my sister were born in September.
as was
Conceived,
I.
conceived during the holiday lush
Yeah.
season. And
Yeah.
so the pregnancies start off badly if you get pregnant over the Christmas, New Year's, because you may not find out for another 2 months that you're pregnant, and this is the season to drink. So that's what they did.
Yeah. Warm up with a hot toddy on a cold winter's evening.
Yeah. So 25 years ago, I started thinking about FASD. I thought, geez, I have symptoms like this, but the news in Canada mostly reported FASD in our Indigenous community. Mm-hmm. And there was serious alcoholism there where mothers drank throughout the pregnancy and delivered drunk. And so serious deform. And I said, well, that's not me. I don't have the flat philtrum here.
Right.
I don't have this issue. So it can't be me. And so I kept putting it aside and coming back to it. But then some 5 or 6 years ago, I really was at my wit's end with myself, didn't know what to do. And sort of like out of a Hail Mary pass, I went off and did an ayahuasca healing circle. And the day following that healing circle is when I admitted to the group that I'm a person with an FASD. Mm-hmm. and that started another journey.
So something happened in that healing process that confirmed it for you?
Ayahuasca, they call it the mother teacher, and that it will teach you. Mm-hmm. And the information it delivered to me that I was ready to accept was that I'm a person with an FASD. Mm-hmm. So that pretty much opened up a can of worms, not with me, but with my family. Because they were more than happy to leave me as just the black sheep in the family, a kid who was consciously causing trouble or whatever. Mm-hmm. My mother needed me to change my behavior before she could accept me. And I wouldn't and I couldn't. So she started distancing herself or resenting who I was. Yeah. I guess as a child, as an infant, she must have felt very inadequate and overwhelmed, especially if she had FASD too.
Yeah. And you just kind of hinted at something there, that she may have felt inadequate. So what triggers new mothers to feel inadequate more than anything else is the challenge in soothing a child and the challenge in feeding that child. So it would be interesting if there was anyone you could ask to verify whether you had challenges suckling, because that's something that we oftentimes see with FASD.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The prisms in your home are making the lights dance on your face.
And so, Patty, that's the next thing to discuss. In integrating my FASD, I realized there would be no solution. And mm-hmm. I'd spent my whole adult life from age 16 on going to workshops, taking therapy, introspecting, Vipassana Buddhist retreats, workshops all over the world I took because I knew there's something wrong with me. So far, mm-hmm. all I knew was ADHD, okay. And here's the interesting thing. In the early 2000s, I hook up with a group of people called HSPs, highly mm-hmm. sensitive people. Yeah. They came out of San Francisco.
Yeah, for the audience, HSP is another form of neurodivergence.
Highly sensitive people. Mm-hmm. And I hooked up with them, did 5 of their retreats, brought the first one to Canada, actually. And when I first met them and you do the check-in, you're going around the circle. I'm going, aha, yes, that's me. Yes, yes. All of a sudden, some 55 years later, I'm having this identification with these people saying, yes, I've got what you've got. I have the same sensitivities, the same irritations and all of this. So I became quite enamored with that group for a while and then moved on. And then when I learned about my FASD, I had to reframe my meeting of these people with HSP. So what's the difference between them and me? I'm acknowledging my FASD. They're acknowledging some HSP like it's a gift, like they've been gifted by God with this extrasensory perception with no attention to the downside of it. So all I could conclude that these were people, first of all, who could afford tuition and flying to these destinations and came from socioeconomically well-established families, into families that stayed together for better or worse. In my family, for worse, but families that stay together they're not going to see the FASD there or acknowledge it as a neurodivergence or anything. Mm-hmm. So now I've reframed. I've had to reframe so many things looking back. So you comment about the rainbow bunnies passing by. Yeah. I'll tell you a story. It was a 60-watt light bulb that saved my life as an infant.
Okay.
I had a night terror. I had night terrors as an infant. Even in the first year, night terrors. Mm-hmm. Apparently, my father would get up and tend to me. The only time he was ever really close to me. And I was so terrified of going to sleep. I'd sleep in a fetal position on my side with one eye looking at a bare 60-watt light bulb in the hallway. And by riveting my attention on that light bulb, I could fall asleep, terrified I'd have that nightmare again. Um, so I'm starting to draw the relevance of light and how I'm actually healing through it. I have a psycho-spiritual belief in the light, that we come from light, we are light. The rainbow is simply distributed light that we live in, and we need a rainbow color. We need to stop on the red and go on the green, and colors mean everything to us. Don't eat the red mushrooms, eat the green ones or whatever. So, and I had a white light experience in the 1990s, a full-blown white light experience. That was during a Buddhist retreat. And because of that one white light experience, I kept going back for the next 20 years, hoping to have another experience like that. So I have a growing faith in what light is. I believe we came from light, we return to light. This period in between of rainbow colors is where we live, and you can't fall further than the light. Death is just landing in the light. So those are some of my spiritual beliefs. And I was like, I spent my whole life hoping to find the answer to what was troubling me, and that with the answer, I would find the solution. And discovering, acknowledging my FASD and realizing it had no solution, I fell into, suicidal ideation. I was like 2-3 months on the suicide hotline.
How old were you at that point? How old were you at that point?
How what?
How old were you at that point?
This was 4 or 5 years ago. I was 68.
Okay.
Trying to reframe my life around FASD, trying to come out as a person with FASD, and realizing that wasn't going to go over well with my family. That it would have been far better if I came out as gay or trans or anything else. Just don't come out as FASD. The stigma was so deep that they could not change their minds. Part of it was that I played the role of the black sheep in the family. And that's how they want to see me.
Well,
anything I have to say comes out as a complaint against the family, against my mother, and they won't tolerate that. So go ahead.
It's very hard if you look from a family systems perspective and the roles that each member plays within that family. It's very hard when one person changes. It's kind of like a mobile over a baby's crib. You tug on one piece and the rest of them start dancing. Well, they don't want to dance. They want things to stay the same because the same feels safe, even if it's horrible.
That was the John Bradshaw Inner Child Workshops on PBS in the early 90s. And I took his workshop in Vancouver too. 500 people in a room. And what's missing from that equation is that the scapegoat happens in a family where both parents are kind of weak and insecure and not complete in themselves. And the scapegoated child gives them a cover, so to speak.
Absolutely true.
And so my siblings all drank the Kool-Aid and I didn't. So automatically that makes me an outsider. I'm somewhat estranged psychologically from all of them now. I play the role when I'm around them, but I get my contact and connection met online with FASD people. Or puppies, kittens, and dogs, and cats, and children, wherever I see them. So,
Well, because animals are all about authenticity.
And
right?
they'll co-regulate with you anytime you want.
Exactly. And within the FASD community online, we get you the way your family of origin never will.
It's so
So,
important. It's so
yeah,
important when someone gives me feedback online and says, "We see you."
yeah,
All of a sudden, it's like, what?
yeah.
I've been invisible my whole life, and now I'm
Mm-hmm.
seen.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah.
So a lot of reframing going on.
So
Uh, yeah,
I
go ahead.
can tell from the look on your face, the emotions are pretty raw right now.
Oh,
Where,
they're always just under the surface.
uh-huh. So how can, what do you think is needed, at least for you, to be able to find some peace around your family's rejection of what is at the root of all your struggles?
Frankly, I don't know. Um,
Okay.
I uh, it's like we're all on a death watch for my mother.
Hmm.
Every morning I get up, I check my phone, I expect to see a message, call home. But
That's
that's been
hard.
going on, that's been going on for 7 years. 7 years. So I think even my siblings and I are getting pretty fed up, sort of like, it's time to go, mom. you know,
My
uh,
mother has been thrown off of hospice twice for not dying fast enough. So I get it. I get it. I understand the frustration and the ambivalence, right? There's a lot of ambivalence there. And the anticipatory loss takes hard work. It takes hard work. A lot of energy there.
yeah, and it's been problematic introducing FASD
Mm-hmm.
because my nieces and nephews are all grown adults. They're 40, 50 years old now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling them that their parent was exposed to alcohol in utero, and that's why
Mm-hmm.
your parent is the way they are.
Yeah.
And my nieces and nephews are sort of willing to look at it and bring it
Mm-hmm.
up with their parents, my brother and sisters, but it stops there. This is where the stigma lies.
So let
This
me
is where
ask,
all of the stigma lies. It's like,
yeah.
you know, my family would be in a good position to make a difference in exposing FASD and working for causes to, but
Mm-hmm.
instead it's the opposite. So it's 3 against 1. And I
Yeah.
bet you that number is out there. Those are the odds out there for all of us with FASD. No one wants to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
Uh, I joined a group online called Stigma Free Society. And I went to their site and I emailed their administrator. We exchanged stuff back and forth. I told them my FASD story, and they're not interested. Go check out Stigma Free Society. It's like probably the most number one stigmatized ND, being FASD, is not to be mentioned anywhere.
Yeah.
Autism, yes, because it's
Mm-hmm.
clean. It's clean. Hey, there's
Yeah.
no bad drinking attached to it or anything like that. You can't pin it on a parent or anything like this.
Yeah.
So if an online group that says we are stigma free doesn't
Mm-hmm.
observe FASD, it's a lost cause.
Yeah.
And
Well,
this is why I turned to rainbows and spirituality and my dysmaturity as my home of innocence, the place where I really want to live.
yeah. I wonder if because what I'm hearing is that there is a need for you have a need, and again, this is my perception from listening. You have a need for your siblings to find the clarity and the freedom that comes with the aha, it's not my fault, it's the alcohol. And
They have,
and
they
they have the right to continue to have a blind eye to it.
True indeed. My only
Yeah.
message to my siblings is you have an opportunity to forgive yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want it? And it's not an easy road to go,
No, it's
because to
not.
change your mind from one of being assertive in your life and taking charge to all of a sudden, I never had control. I've got this serious
Mm-hmm.
ND, and how do I address it? I
Yeah.
mean, it put me into a tailspin. What would it do with them? I mean, they're 70, 80 years old. They're close to 80 years old, you know?
On the one hand, Neil, that's a very valid point. On the other hand, in order for them to take that step of self-forgiveness, they have to acknowledge that there's something to forgive. And if they're not there yet, then the time is not right.
And I guess what saddens me is that, you know, I was there when my father died, and he died completely ignorant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, interesting, the only comment he made in the last 24 hours of his life, he actually sat up in bed and when he saw me and said, I remember holding you as a baby when you had your nightmares.
Oh,
The only time in his life when he held me, hugged me, and loved me.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you know, that's what happened in my infancy with him. And so I bonded with my father right away. Everything he did, I did. He'd go into the garage, pick up a hammer. I'd pick up a hammer. I'm 3, 4 years, 4, 5 years old, you know.
Yeah.
I'm doing what he said. I'm hanging out with my dad. And then it stopped. I couldn't hang out with him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's when, you know, he was to be my mentor. He turned out to be my tormentor.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah. Just,
yeah.
you know, it was easy enough to make an argument, the nature nurture argument, since I've had so much experience with therapy and groups and, you know,
Yeah.
introspective work. Uh, I forgot my train of thought.
Well, I would respond to that simply by saying nurture is powerful, but everything starts with the nature.
Well, Patty, yeah, I could make a cogent argument that all of my issues just come from a dysfunctional family, nothing else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because all of the evidence is there. All of
Yeah.
the therapists could point to it, you know, in any Freudian way you want to. So I was conflicted my entire adult life. I said, well, is it nature? Is it nurture? And now I realize it's a double whammy.
It's
You
both.
know, I was born messed up with FASD, and that confronted my mother, made her feel inadequate and incompetent, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and inevitably resentful.
Yeah.
And she shared that resentment with my siblings.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you're not like Neil. I'm so glad you're not bad like
Oh,
Neil. I'm so glad you're.
yeah.
This is how my siblings learned to behave in the family, by not doing what I did.
And
But anyway, you know,
I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are really resonating with what you're saying. What messages of hope can you give them in their journeys?
I turned to the light.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I'm not even a religious person.
Mm-hmm.
I have a scientific, psycho-spiritual relationship with light. I honor it now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I firmly believe that our source is light, not this solar light, not this lunar light, not a thermal light, but a light inside we have.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, I mean this. Maybe it's the pineal gland, right in the center of the brain. That's where a lot of focus is and research these days, where serotonin and endorphins and DMT is produced in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, here's something for the audience. Embrace your dysmaturity
Okay.
because it represents your innocence. It's the most
Hmm.
beautiful part of you, your innocence. And that carries forward. It's like FASD doesn't impact innocence. And, dysmaturity has disrupted advancement in career, all kinds of things, always saying the wrong things, being inappropriate or
Yeah.
whatever. You don't gain trust or confidence with the leaders around you, and you're never considered a leader either. But
Let me pause you just long enough to define dysmaturity for the audience.
sure.
So dysmaturity, in contrast to immaturity, is when socially and developmentally we have a slower pace for that aspect of our being compared to our chronological maturity, as opposed to immaturity. That's when we're right with ourselves in terms of social emotional development, but for whatever reason we are acting as if we are younger. If we're confronted, we just snap out of it and conduct ourselves as people would expect for our chronological age. When we have a dysmaturity, we're not necessarily capable of doing that, because although the body might be 6, the maturity level might be 3. And also it's uneven because different aspects of our skill, our different skill levels can be at different places along that maturity line. And so it's the emphasis when there's a problematic behavior is to say, okay, I'm looking at this behavior. This is typical of a what-year-old, and then providing the supports that you would to someone who is that younger age. And that allows the person to scaffold up their skills and meet their potential, really. And it's thought that in the normal population, right, neurotypical kids really fulfill that maturity level at 25, not 18, not 16, but in their mid 20s. Whereas it's believed that most of us with FASD have an extra decade to go if dysmaturity is one of our symptoms, but it's not universal. It's common, but it's not universal.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're right. It is when we hit our 20s. Following adolescence comes coalescence.
Mm-hmm.
This is when who we are in the world are supposed to integrate, and now we're
Yeah.
going to be functional adults, players in the world. Dysmaturity disrupts that path forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I've met others online who express the same thing. It's like we can function in a neurotypical world 95% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the neurotypical world accepts us that we're like them until something happens, that 5% of the time where we have a connection or an upset or something. And then the team, the management, the group you work with realize, oh, okay, you've broken a line of trust.
Yeah.
And I've done that a zillion times. And at that point, it's usually the marker that, okay, I'm on to my next job very soon. I can always make a great first impression. I've got hired in jobs that I am nowhere competent or capable of fulfilling. I found myself as an electronics engineer on a ship in the South China Sea, and I was completely incompetent. I didn't know the difference between AC and DC hardly, and I was working with 14 kilojoules of electrical power. That's another reason for believing in God. The situations I put myself in, I am nowhere near an electronics engineer. Here's the problem. If I looked like Down syndrome, they would never have given me the job.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, that's interesting. for decades before understanding my FASD, I always wished I had Down syndrome. I wish I had the physical features of Down syndrome, because then my behavior would be explicable. People would understand it.
Yeah.
As such, there was no explanation. I should not be acting like a Down child, a Down syndrome child. Yeah. I'd watch, a Down child in the shopping mall or whatever, just going along, getting their way and having their pleasure and their upset all together, being entitled to all of that because they were Down syndrome. And it's like when FASD came into the puzzle, then it all made sense. It wasn't any better, but it made sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And that in itself brings comfort. It brings the ability for us to have grace for ourselves. When we're held to standards that, for whatever reason, because of our various shortcomings, and everyone's are different, we're not able to meet expectations, we end up internalizing all that judgment through the years. And I know for myself, for decades, I pinned it on being the only one in my community with type 1 diabetes. Well, that could explain little bits, but it was not a fitting explanation of the struggles that I had socially, as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult. Whereas the FASD, once I came face to face with that, it was like, now I get it. And that was liberating. It certainly didn't change anything, but it did change everything at the same time. It changes nothing and everything at the same time, because we can give ourselves grace. Any last words of wisdom for those who are watching or listening to us this morning? Well, it's morning when we're recording. I don't know what time people are listening or watching.
It's usually the other way around. I get my wisdom and knowledge from them, from the others I meet. It's just, I look forward to the conference next month in Seattle.
Oh, I'm so glad you get to go.
Get to meet a lot of people I feel very warm about.
Yeah.
That I only know from online. Like I say, I've done workshops my whole life. I've done workshops with thousands of people, all the way from California, Oregon, Washington, BC, elsewhere in the world. That's where I would get my social connection, That's where I get to have my feelings, is in workshops. Yeah. It was kind of vicarious, but I'd join a workshop and people would reveal themselves and I'd reveal myself, and we'd cry and we'd hug and have a big connection, and it would be wonderful. And then the workshop's over and I go back to my life, my empty life. Yeah. So I really became a workshop junkie for decades.
Yeah.
Everywhere, anywhere.
The beautiful bit about this, though, Neil, is that you already have existing relationships with a lot of the people that are going. And so you will see them again, even if it's just on Zoom, or, you will interact with them. You will have that ongoing connection. And, that's something that is so important for anyone who is struggling with a hidden challenge, is connection with other people who have those same struggles. It's very empowering. When I was a kid with type 1, that 1 week a year that I spent in diabetic camp was the most important time of the year. It was more important to me than Christmas, because it was the only place I was normal. So I know what you're going to be experiencing at Seattle. The conference will probably be over by the time this gets put on the air. I think you're probably going to be April 15th is the air date for this episode. So I think it will have just wrapped up. I wish that I had the ability to edit things together. I'd record just a few minutes of you, talking about your ahas. I would love to be able to add that, but we'll just have to do it another time.
Yeah, sure. The other thing that's coming up in Seattle in conjunction with this conference is that I'm having a full blown FASD assessment done in
Yeah.
Seattle a couple of days before this conference.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be just really inundated with myself, my FASD, and those also in the
Do you
same boat.
do you have some downtime between the assessment and the
Yeah.
beginning of the conference? Because you're going to be putting your brain through the works, through the ringer as part of that assessment process. Do you have some time to just
Yeah, I do. A
good,
couple of days. This happens a couple of days before the conference, so
good, good.
that'll be good. Yeah.
Even though there's nothing harmful in the process, it's still going to take a toll on you.
Well,
So I'm glad you're going to have some recuperation time before you get all that social blah of being amongst so many of the family.
yeah, it's about a 5 hour process, a
Yeah,
5 hour interview. That would be exhausting for anyone, but for
yeah,
FASD, maybe more so. So I
yeah,
don't know why they would make it that intense, 5 hours. It doesn't seem conducive to getting a
yeah.
fair picture. Why stress out an FASD person like this just to find out about their FA? Anyway,
Well, but it does provide the opportunity to witness what happens under stress, which may
I
be a piece of what they're looking at.
the thing is, I'm not looking for a rubber chop. Yes, you have FASD. What I'm looking at is give me some criterion. Where is my comprehension at? Where's my
Yes.
math ability at? I
Yeah.
understand I'm probably at a grade 6 or grade 7 level on math, but I want to know the areas that I'm actually doing quite well at. And,
Yeah.
you know, I was 17 years old before I realized that I could write a story.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and of course going online I do nothing but write and I'm so enjoying it. I don't know how to take it to the next level, but it's become so meaningful for me to be able to be as open and transparent as possible. Maybe that's the message to those out there listening. Don't be
Mm-hmm.
afraid to be open. Don't be
Yeah.
afraid to be transparent. um, you found a safe place to express yourself in. You'll be warmly received, and you can grow from there. And if you don't tell yourself the truth, you can't grow.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said. And I think that wraps everything up so beautifully, Neil. Thank you for
Okay, Patty.
wrapping up with such a gem. I can't believe we're like near the end of our time already. I'm so grateful to have had this time with you today. And I look forward to our next conversation, whenever that is. And thank you again for joining us on Living with FASD. Everybody, I hope that you will send in your ideas for topics, or if you know of a guest that you would love to see on the show, then let me know that too. And you can do both of those things by emailing me at livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. In the meantime, there are two good sources online on Facebook. There's actually a lot of FASD groups on Facebook. When I was writing Sit by Sit, I just did a Google search or a Facebook group search for FASD, and there were like 90 groups. I was totally, or groups/pages. I was blown away by that. There's one, of course, Living with FASD podcast. And there's also, oh, we're looking at some of your prisms. Yeah. Um, but there's also the Flying with Broken Wings that you heard me mention at the beginning of the hour. And that is just a delightful place where we all have each other's back. So, oh, lots of crystals. Yeah. All right. Well, Neil, I thank you for sharing with us. Um, I love to see all that light refracts everywhere. So keeps the
Yeah.
light dancing around you.
Yes, get the
Yeah.
light in your life. Get the light in your life.
Yeah.
Love
All
of
right.
love of light. LOL. Love of light. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Patty. Take care. We'll see you
All right.
online.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Come back next week.